Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It's April 11th, 2025, and I want to talk about the persistent confusion and disorientation that people in the West have about reality in general, and specifically regarding the situation in Ukraine. So I guess there's something, I don't know, it's something about my personality, whatever it is, that I've always had a skepticism about what I'm told. And I've always had a kind of a distrust of authority in general, which I think is not an unusual trait within people in the West and people in general, because, you know, we've been lied to various times. People have been let down a lot of times, and you see it doesn't matter. I meet people with from many different countries, many of whom are not even they're so-called adversaries to the United States. And everywhere you go, you'll hear this basically the same story. We don't believe the government, this kind of thing. But I'll just speak from my own personal experience. So, for the strange thing that I observe in Western populations is that even though they know that they were lied to, they eventually discover that they were lied to, they still persistently believe in the next set of lies. So I'm going to go back and do a little bit of personal history here. So the internet came of age, or in the kind of like the mid 90s. I think, Windows, Microsoft Windows appeared in 1995, and then the internet happened, and there was emails and so on, and I wasn't very, I'm not technically very oriented. There were chat rooms or something like that you could get involved with. I didn't really understand how to use them. But I guess as the technology became more accessible, I started using the internet more and more. So in 1999, for some reason, I came across a book called The Unauthorized Biography of George Bush. That is George H.W. Bush. That was the father of George W. Bush, who was the president who came to power in 2000. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. But the main point of this it was called the unauthorized biography of George Bush. And I'm not sure, I think it was published maybe in the late 80s or sometime during the 1990s, but it was free, it was online, and I read this book. And basically what the book talked about was the fact that George H.W. Bush, as it was presented to us as an American citizen, was quite a difference from what he actually represented. It turns out that his father, Prescott Bush, was a wealthy banker. He was a member of a secretive fraternity in Yale called Skull and Bones. And as you go deeper down the rabbit hole, you find out that Skull and Bones was founded by an American guy who was involved in the opium trade in China. And of course, the opium trade in China was devastating for Chinese society. And it took, with the Opium Wars took place in the mid 19th century, and it took another century basically for the communists under Mao Zedong to kick all these foreigners out of China, and that started the rise of what is now, arguably the most powerful country economically in the world. And one could say, from one point of view, it would certainly give the United States a run for its money, so to speak, if there was ever a shooting war between the two countries. But in any case, so you had this is Skull and Bones, and it's a very selective, secretive fraternity where you have to be chosen in order to be involved in it, and they have a very what can I say, kind of secretive, you could say cult-like initiation process, where apparently from another book that I read, they put you through a kind of near-death experience where you have to lie naked in a coffin, and it's as if you are being, you're dying, and then somehow and there's other rituals that may involve sexual aspects to it, which are, basically, what can I say, either traumatizing or putting some kind of imprint in your brain where you become part of this organization. So it becomes very tight knit, and they're very secretive about what they do. So it turns out that this guy Prescott Bush was he was involved, you could say tangentially, with an attempt to overthrow the government of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1934, called the Business Plot. And several of these major industrialists, have this idea in their heads that we ordinary people have nothing to do with the success of the United States. It's their ability to organize us cats, so to speak, to get them to create the industrial powerhouse that the United States was in the 1920s and 1930s and into the 1940s and 50s and 60s. But of course, in the 1930s, you had the Great Depression, which was brought on by speculation in Wall Street. Lots of people lost everything, not just capitalists, but average people lost everything. The farmers in the Midwest, went through terrible times. And Roosevelt was basically elected president to try and fix this situation. And these industrialists, who one of them was Prescott Bush. You had several CEOs of major corporations, the names of which escapes me at the moment. But you also had people like Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles, who were in this whole kind of club, to borrow the term from George Carlin, who were basically trying to commandeer U.S. policy, and to a large extent they really have. So it turns out that during the 1930s, these people like John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles started developing, and Prescott Bush were developing business relationships with the Nazis in Germany. And following World War II, Allen Dulles, who was he was like an intelligence officer under Roosevelt, was secretly negotiating with Nazis behind Roosevelt's back to have a separate peace with Nazi Germany, in which case they would then join forces with the remnants of the Wehrmacht and then reinvade the Soviet Union and defeat it. Winston Churchill actually had a plan called Operation Unthinkable, and fortunately the Soviet Union got wind of this, and they could see movement of these forces positioning themselves to reinvade the areas of Europe that were controlled by the Soviet Union following the end of the Nazi regime. And Stalin said to Churchill, there's some really strange stuff going on there. What do you think you're doing? And Churchill, disingenuously said, I don't know anything about that. Well, he did know. He knew exactly what was going on. So this is the kind of double dealing that we saw as a feature of U.S. and Western foreign policy. Okay, so now we move into so this is a lot of this information came through in this book, the Unauthorized Biography of George Bush. So we know that the Bush family has connections going back decades to Nazi ideology. We also heard in the late 1980s that George H.W. Bush, the father, had Eastern European Nazis, presumably from either Ukraine or from Latvia or one of the Baltic countries, all of which were aligned with, they were all, they were Nazi collaborators from these Eastern European areas. They were hostile to the Soviet Union. And so you have this innate hostility to the Soviet Union, which was, even though President Bush, H.W. Bush, was the president during that time when the Soviet Union disbanded, that they were making all kinds of promises to the Soviet Union that no, NATO is not going to expand, and let's all have peace. And basically they were saying, hey, Soviet Union, we know that you're kind of tired of this Cold War, so let's you disarm and let's you pull your troops out of the countries that were in the Warsaw Pact. That was countries like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia. These were countries that were basically a buffer zone that was created after World War II because the Soviet Union said, we're really tired of getting invaded and we want to have some countries that are between us and the West. It's not terribly different, in fact, from the U.S. policy of the Monroe Doctrine, where the United States created this so-called Monroe Doctrine, saying, you European powers, this is our sphere of influence. You better just stay out of it. So, having been invaded, by Napoleon in 1812, and by the Western powers after the Russian Revolution in 1918. And then by Nazi Germany in 1941, which, by the way, was a coalition of other countries such as Czechoslovakia, which had been taken over by the Nazis, and Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, Finland, countries like that. They were basically invading the Soviet Union as part of this Hitler coalition. So the Soviet Union, obviously defeated them all basically single-handedly. And after World War II, with the agreement in Yalta, the Soviet Union said, we need this buffer zone, and that was the purpose of having these countries with friendly governments that were friendly to the Soviet Union. But the West was immediately plotting against the Soviet Union. They created, first of all, Churchill, made his famous, I think it was Fulton, Missouri speech, talking about an Iron Curtain. So Churchill's latent and innate hostility to the Soviet Union and to Russia in general, because the British have had it in for Russia for at least since the Crimean War, when the Soviet Union, or when Russia invaded England. That was a mistake. England invaded Russia in the Crimean Peninsula in 1853. So you have England, which is constantly accusing Russia of being a threat to England, when in fact Russia has never invaded England. And England has invaded Russia 3 times since starting with the Crimean War, following the Russian Revolution, and now recently you're making extremely hostile statements towards Russia in this Ukraine war, and in fact even supplying both intelligence as well as missiles, which are being used against Russia. So technically, the United Kingdom, England, is waging a war against Russia, and if Russia didn't exert extreme restraint, they could send one missile to the island of England, and it would be over. England would be literally washed off the map. But they don't do that. But England still has these designs, and they're talking about placing troops in Odessa, which again is a historically Russian city. Okay, so all this stuff is going on, and I learned about this in 1999 when I read this book. And then of course you had the 9/11, which happens, in 2000. There's an election, and George W. Bush steals the election. It's like you had to be brain dead to not see that this was a theft of an election. 2000. There's debate about whether some of the votes were correct or incorrect, and there's a recount, and then the George Bush goes to the Supreme Court and says, we don't want to recount, it would be not fair to us. And the Supreme Court, in an unsigned opinion, agrees with the Bush campaign. The recount is stopped, and it ends up that George Bush wins the election, except that sometime later the New York Times said, well, actually Al Gore would have won the election if there had been a recount. So that immediately shows that we're not living in a real democracy when you have the Supreme Court siding against the ability of the people to actually choose who their president is going to be. And then shortly after that, we have September 11th. And at that point, when September 11th happened, it was like 7:30 in the morning for me in California. I get a call from my colleague at work. He says, Eric, some planes have flown into buildings. And the first thought in my mind was Reichstag. So what do I mean by that? Well, Hitler in 1933 basically got control of the German government through various machinations, and even though he only won 33% of the vote, but he becomes the Chancellor of Germany through, as I say, these kind of plots. And shortly after that, there is an attack on the Reichstag. That's the equivalent of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. And immediately Hitler says, oh, the communists did it. And so there's a big crackdown. They created something called the Enabling Act to protect the state from the communists. And that was how Hitler got control, eventually militarized with the help with the financing of people like Prescott Bush. And he got the Nazis got the help from Standard Oil and Ford. Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford was a friend of Hitler. So this is what happened. Excuse me, just a second while my phone acts up. So the Soviets saw Hitler as being a major threat to them back in the 1930s, and here we are in the 2000s, and the Russians are beginning to realize, this is Vladimir Putin, who had been very favorable towards capitalism and towards the West. He really wanted to be friends with the West, and he kept getting the door slammed in his face by NATO and Bill Clinton, and NATO was expanding, which was something they violating the agreements that they'd made with Gorbachev, and of course the West had swooped into Russia after the end of the Soviet Union, and they basically asset stripped Russia. So there's been a consistent hostile attitude of the West towards Russia. Then you have the Iraq War, which was clearly based on lies. Now, by the time September 11th happened, we're already starting to see some significant ability of a counter-narrative to take place. So, for example, in November of 2001, two months after September 11th happened, a whistleblower named Mike Rupert came to San Francisco, where I was living, and he gave about an hour-long presentation, and followed by another 2 hours of question and answers, where he basically blew the lid off of what the deep state has been doing for years, the corruption and all the machinations that have been going on, since at least since George Bush. So by that time, I understood, we really have a problem in this country in 2001. Then, as I say, in 2003 or 2002, there's this whole question about whether Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. And people like Ray McGovern, who had been a former CIA officer, a very high-ranking officer in the intelligence area. That is, he was the one who actually did intelligence research to find out what's actually going on inside of a country. And he wasn't involved in the he wasn't involved in the dirty tricks side of CIA. He was involved in just trying to understand what's going on. And he started an organization called the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, which exists to this day. And he got several of his colleagues to basically say to George W. Bush, Saddam does not have weapons of mass destruction. Please don't invade Iraq. And Scott Ritter, who was a weapons inspector at that time, went in front of Congress and he said, please don't invade Iraq. There's no reason to. It doesn't have weapons of mass destruction. Well, Joe Biden confronted him and said, we don't care what your opinion is. You're operating above your pay grade. We're the ones who make decisions. We're the ones who decide policy, and we don't care what your facts are. So this is another major, red flag for me. And of course, they invade Iraq in 2003, and we all know how that turned out. Then, because the war was going so badly, Obama, is George Bush is he also stole this 2004 election because he was in opposition to John Kerry of the Democratic Party, except of course that John Kerry was also a member of Skull and Bones, this secretive fraternity. And when you asked either of them, what is it about this fraternity, they'd say, it's so secret we can't tell you. So not a good indication of transparency here. Who are these people who are basically in the same fraternity running against each other? Is that going to be a fair election? And of course, it turns out that the Secretary of State in Ohio who was responsible for counting the votes, was also the chairman of the elect George Bush campaign in the state of Ohio. No conflict of interest there, huh? So George Bush wins the election, quote unquote, wins. The Green Party and the Libertarian Party take this vote to court, and the court in Ohio says, well, what we need is to have the real plaintiff here, that is John Kerry, whose election purportedly may have been stolen. We need him to okay having a recount. And John Kerry said, oh, never mind, don't bother with that. And so the Supreme Court says to the Green Party and to the Libertarian Party, sorry, since the offended party in this election isn't willing to stand up for its rights, you have no standing in court. So the Democratic Party was clearly in league with the Republican Party to allow George Bush to win the election. That's 2004. The situation in Ukraine goes downhill. George Bush is, from like a 90% approval rating after 9/11. He wasn't very popular after a few months, but when September 11th happens, the American public says, oh, let's rally around the flag, rally around George Bush. And George Bush is saying, if you're not with us, you're with the terrorists. And so they basically were, bullying the American people into supporting this imperial agenda. Well, in 2008, Barack Obama appears out of nowhere. He's a fledgling senator who didn't have much of a legislative history at all. All we knew about him was that he was like a community organizer in Chicago, and he's a good guy, and he's progressive, and he belongs to this cool church of African Americans, so we should elect him to be president. Now, at one point there was a debate between him and John McCain. And this is in August of 2008. And John McCain says to Barack Obama, you know, we know that you're very irresponsible and you're going to just go in and attack Pakistan. And that's a terrible thing to do. Speaking from John McCain, who was famous for making a joke about bomb Iran, which was a takeoff on a Beach Boys song. So Barack Obama says, this is in August during their debate, he says, John, you know, what you're saying is so irresponsible because we would make every effort diplomatically to resolve the problem of terrorists operating in Pakistan before we would do anything militarily. And me, with my skeptical brain, I'm thinking, so Barack Obama, what you're saying is, we really don't want to bomb you, but we're going to have to do it even though we really don't want to. And of course, they just use this narrative of they're using every diplomatic effort to excuse themselves for clearly what was aggression. So, of course, Obama wins the election, and sure enough, you know, within like a month, Obama's bombing, you know, Pakistan. So these Democrats, if you think that they are going to be any kind of you know, mitigating factor in favor of peace, you know, just forget it. And so now, you know, we can flash forward to Donald Trump, and he's saying he just came out with this incredible statement. You know, Iran. You know, first of all, Iran has been 2 weeks away from creating a nuclear weapon for the last 20 years. You know, and it just every year we hear the same accusation. Iran is going to develop a nuclear weapon. They're on the verge of developing a nuclear weapon, and we really don't want to invade them, but we're just going to have to do that, even though recently the National Intelligence Estimate said that no, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and yet Trump comes out and he says, you know, we're in a very dangerous time now where Iran is, you know, if they don't make a deal with, we know they want to make a deal with us, but, you know, if they don't make a deal, so I'm afraid some bad things are going to happen. And, you know, this is the kind of, what kind of, where do we hear this kind of threatening talk? You know, it's just very, very inflammatory and, you know, not helpful at all. And they're just playing with fire. So why do I bring all this stuff up? It's because in the context of the Ukraine war, in 2022, Russia initiates what is called a special military operation, where they basically went into Ukraine with around 150,000 troops. They're in, you know, shooting distance of Kiev, and Kiev, the government in Kiev under Zelensky says, okay, yeah, we should negotiate. Okay, so they're sitting in Istanbul and they hammer out an agreement, and of course Zelensky violates the agreement immediately, presumably because of pressure or encouragement, however you want to describe it, with Boris Johnson. So in 2022, I get phone calls from my friends in America, and they say, Eric, what's your opinion about this? I said, you know, it's quite obvious. You know, the U.S. has been itching for war with Russia. They want to destroy Russia to get its resources. That's what it's all about. And they're using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. Oh, Eric, you don't know what you're talking about, and how dare you say this kind of thing? And it's clearly Russia's the aggressor, and so on and so forth. And I said to them, look, you know, you can believe CNN or you can believe me. I've been writing about this since 2015 because in 2014 the United States staged a coup. I knew at that time, and anybody who had any you know, curiosity about this situation knew that Victoria Nuland was on the phone with the ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, and they were plotting the coup. And at the end of the phone call, Victoria Nuland says we just got to get the attaboy from Joe Biden, who was the vice president at the time. So, and of course, Obama was the one who was initiating this. So the coup happens. These Nazi formations who had been collaborators with the Germans during World War II, these Ukrainians were collaborating with the Nazis during World War II. They committed massive atrocities, and following the defeat of the German Nazis, the Ukrainian Nazis continued to fight the Soviet Union into the 1950s, and eventually they were brought to heel, so to speak. But the CIA was backing these people secretly for years. And then when the Soviet Union fell, this was the chance for the U.S. to step in and basically weaponize these people. So between 1991 and 2014, these extreme nationalist factions of Ukraine were like termites, chewing away at the very, very weak foundation of Ukraine as a fledgling democracy following its independence from the Soviet Union. Because I was tracking this stuff starting in 2013 through a website called the Saker, who was a former anti-Soviet Russian, ethnic Russian. He got a job working in kind of intelligence with an organization affiliated with NATO, and he finally realized that what was going on here was not the issue of Soviet Union being so bad. It was the issue of the United States and the West staging he called it "Stop the Empire's War Against Russia." So he figured out what was going on. And I read, many of his posts, and he had many very intelligent fellow commentators who were talking about all these issues going back to, like 2013 when I first started following him. So 2013, I realized there's an issue going on in Ukraine. 2014, the coup happens. I'm following exactly what's going on with that. In 2015, I make a trip personally to Crimea, to Sevastopol, and I talk with people there, and I ask them, what actually happened here. And one particular couple that I met said that they were instrumental in organizing a referendum to get to, be free of Ukraine, which had been treating them poorly ever since the independence, and maybe possibly even before the Ukraine Soviet Socialist Republic became independent. You had these nationalist factions within the Ukrainian body politic who were fundamentally hostile to ethnic Russians. So, and I'm there, listening to what these people are saying. So, I knew what was going on, but of course, nobody in the West is following any of this. The war breaks out between the breakaway republics of Donetsk, who were physically attacked, bombed by the coup regime that the United States installs, and I'm seeing what's going on. Other people see what's going on. One of the heroes of that time was a guy named Russell Bentley, who was living in Texas, and he said, this is obviously a fascist takeover of Ukraine by U.S.-backed forces. And he said he just couldn't allow that to happen. He went there and physically fought, to prevent a massacre of the people in eastern Ukraine. So I was, very familiar with all of this stuff. And in 2015, I go there and I wrote a couple of articles, talking about this. Years go by. There's agreements called the Minsk agreements. Those are violated consistently by the Ukrainians with the support of France and England and presumably the United States as well. And in 2022, it becomes very, very clear that a massacre is being prepared using the rejuvenated army of Ukraine which was built as basically a NATO army, with the help of NATO officers and NATO equipment. All this was, it was like transparent, very obvious what was going on. But the American people are systematically kept in the dark about this. And I get these phone calls from people saying, Eric, why are you so sympathetic to the people in the breakaway republics of Ukraine, and why are you, why can't you condemn Russia for, basically for invading Ukraine unprovoked? So that is the purpose of this this rant that I'm giving you, to give you some kind of background on what this is all about. And I've included below this video the two articles that I wrote from 2015. One on my visit to Moscow, which was the Victory Day of the 70th anniversary of the Victory Day, which for me was very important because I had family that was killed by Nazis during World War II, and I understood that the Soviet Union was the one that was basically, defending the entire world against these fascists. And as the movie that I posted recently pointed out, even the American ambassador to the Soviet Union at that time said that if the Nazis had won against the Soviet Union, they would have captured all of those resources, and the United States would have been next on the list of countries to be attacked, and the Germans would have overpowered even the United States, and it would have been a complete catastrophe for mankind. But will the Soviet Union ever get any credit for that? They systematically won't allow it. Why? Because you go back to the 1930s and you can see these fascist sympathizers within the U.S. body politics, which are deeply embedded in the decision-making centers within the United States, so that people don't really understand what's going on. You're completely ignorant of this. But what's happened is that since the special military operation, which is called that because if Russia had been serious about a war, they would have flattened Kiev, the Verkhovna Rada building, the presidential buildings, all of that stuff. The Russians could have just flattened it, just the way they did Berlin in World War II. But they didn't do that because they wanted to, preserve, they didn't want to cause massive civilian casualties. So that's basically what was going on. But now what we're seeing is that it's quite clear that despite all the Western propaganda, Russia has proven that they're not going to put up with this crap, and they're winning on the battlefield. And the West is in continual denial about all this. But if you listen to people like Larry Johnson, who's a former CIA operative, who also, he's like a spy who came in from the cold, and you listen to Ray McGovern, you listen to Scott Ritter and other military experts, Daniel Davis. These are people who are seasoned military professionals or intelligence professionals, and they're telling you, do not believe what the United States government and the media are telling you. It's all BS. And yet, people are still very, very slow to believe the truth. And what I'll finish with is to say that they lied to us, lied to you about the causes of the Vietnam War. They lied to you about the causes of Afghanistan. They lied to you about the causes of Iraq. They lied to you about Libya. They lied to you about Syria. And yet, when they come out with a new set of lies about the circumstances surrounding the war in Ukraine, you believe them. And I just have to ask, why? Why, after all these lies that we're being told about the reasons that the U.S. has for starting wars or fomenting wars or provoking wars, why do you still keep believing them? I don't understand it. And the worst part of it is that I can, make these statements. I can do my own research. I can physically go to these places and ask people. And as I pointed out in one of my my blogs from 2015, I met a woman who was in the Ukrainian army in 2013, and she said she saw a coup coming, and as an ethnic Russian living in Crimea, she realized as soon as that coup happened, she had to go home and defend her country, defend Crimea, defend Sevastopol from fascists. She understood what was going on. I understood because I listened to her and I trusted her. And subsequently, of course, other people like Regis Tremblay or Bruce Gagnon have gone to Ukraine, and they have also independently confirmed all this. So I've done my homework, but the average person is either too lazy or too brainwashed, or just has an inability to exert enough critical thinking to see through all this. So that is the problem. And until the American people finally wake up and they just say enough, we're not going to buy the New York Times anymore. We're not going to buy the Washington Post anymore. We're not going to buy subscriptions to cable news, with MSNBC and Fox News and all the rest of them. As this fellow Mike Rupert said in 2001, the first person I referred to earlier, he said, "Don't give your money to people who lie to you." That is the main point I'm trying to make in this video. Do not give your money to people who lie to you. There are credible people like Ray McGovern, like Larry Johnson. There are credible people on the libertarian right, like Andrew Napolitano, who his ideology as a libertarian I may not, agree with as far as economics are concerned, but the man is a fundamentally decent person who is sincerely trying to understand the truth, and he knows what's the difference between right and wrong and what is true and false. And he's willing to seek out people and give them a voice which our major media and which our government tries to suppress. And so he's an example. Ray McGovern you should listen to. Brian Berletic, he has a channel called The New Atlas. I've been following him for 10 years. He's been saying the same thing. It is U.S. imperialism that is causing all these problems. And we simply have to accept that fact if we're going to take our country back. The gray zone is another example. Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate, Ben Norton, Geopolitical Economy Report, Michael Hudson, Richard Wolff. These are economists who are talking about the economic dysfunction of the U.S. System, capitalist system, which is leading us down the primrose path to basically, oblivion. So there are sources out there. You simply have to turn off the crap that you're fed and start listening to those people. They're on YouTube. They're on, I'm naming some names. If you just do Google searches, you can find them. So that's basically what I want to talk about today. And I hope that this will be helpful as a kind of a wake-up call for all of you to, see through the propaganda finally. And many of you are like slowly waking up to it. But, as I wanted to point out earlier, when I have family members who are flying a Ukrainian blue and yellow flag, I was extremely disturbed by this, because even highly intelligent, educated people simply fell for the U.S. propaganda. Poor little Ukraine is not poor little Ukraine. It is a dagger trying to destroy Russia in order to get its resources, and they're willing to use the absolute worst people, such as the Azov Battalion and Tornado and other of these extremist military organizations in Ukraine, just like they used ISIS or Al-Qaeda. They employ these people, they hide behind them, and they say they're so bad, but they're actually weaponizing them. And so this is a major problem, and people need to see through this. And as I say, look for alternative sources of information. So thank you all for listening to this. I know it's kind of a rant. I hope I haven't, turned you off. But it's like, as the as Morpheus said to Neo in the movie The Matrix, I didn't say it would be easy. I'm just saying it's the truth. That's what we need. We need the truth. So just in closing, please, like and share this video, and like and share the post that I've done on Substack. And also, if you can, visit my stores, where you can buy an information billboard T-shirt which says, question everything, and start. We've got to increase the political and social consciousness of the people in the United States, because if we go sleepwalking into a nuclear war, which is quite possible, we're all going to die. It's really that bad. So thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next time.